All right, we told you earlier that we'll focus on the economy, specifically the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics on Monday released the latest gross domestic product, which showed that non-oil sectors' performance was the strongest growth since the fourth quarter of 2015.
Well, the 2.05% growth in the non-oil sector to the Minister of Budget and National Planning is evidence that the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, ERGP, implementation is yielding positive results.
Well, the three priority areas which drove the growth in these sectors include road, rail, and water transportation, which grew by 21.76%, followed by construction, which is 7.66%, and electricity, which is 7.59%.
Other non-oil sectors that drove the growth in the second quarter include telecommunications, which grew at 11.51%, water supply and sewage, which grew at 11.98%, and broadcasting, which grew at 21.92%.
There was, however, a drop in the real growth rate for the period as a result of contraction in the oil sector, which still accounts for more than 70% of Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings.
The contraction in the oil and gas sector is about minus 3.95% compared to about 14.77% recorded in the first quarter and 3.53% recorded in the corresponding period in 2017. And
so we will be taking an evaluation of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan and whether it is succeeding or not with an economist and also Dr. Fashola. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Good to have you here with us. Of course, one of the dominant stories on the African continent and in Nigeria is that Nigeria is a country with the most poor people in the world. How do you juxtapose that with what the federal government is selling? That, look, we have an economic growth plan that is on track.
Right. That's good. Thank you very much for the question. The point is that, you know, at least when I looked at this scenario and looked at the ERGP, you know, the documents that are available out there and so on. What I told myself was, at least we have a plan, right? Mm-hmm. We have a plan. In 1986, we were asked to stop planning. You can't believe it, but in those days of SAP, you know, we were, you know, in those days, you know, a certain segment of the economic world mocked those who planned for anything. They told us, look at China, look at Russia. These guys were planned economies. You don't need to plan. So it's like someone coming to you to say, every month when you collect your salaries, don't plan, just spend. You know, the market forces will plan on your behalf. So it took us quite a while to get to this point. And this ERGP actually, which was put together by this government, as a reaction to the deep into recession, the deep recession we were into a couple of years back, it was an attempt to bring back planning into the fore, you know. So for one, we have an ERGP. Certainly, yes, I do believe the statistics that says that we still have the largest number of poor people in the world. And you can also see here Theresa May, PM Theresa May, echoing that, I think, in South Africa just yesterday. So that's for real. However, you need this kind of plan to begin to get out of this kind of situation. Then that means that we then need to focus on what are the elements of the plan. What are the plan? What are the components? What's the plan emphasizing? I know, of course, there's still the issue of economic growth. There's the issue of competition, the issue of markets. But I see curiously and very, very interestingly that the plan also has an element for people. And that's where we need to talk about the investment in human capital, because that's where you can get the most from. I like to tell people very often that you know, the top 6 companies in the world by market valuation are companies that were built by brains, you know. So we're talking of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, you know, we're talking of Facebook, we're talking of Alibaba. Those kind of companies were formed by young people, and each of those companies by market valuation, they are larger than the Nigerian GDP. Meaning that the entire work, I mean, for example, Facebook's about $500 billion in terms of market valuation. Nigeria's GDP is about $400 billion in terms of market. I mean, that's the GDP itself. Meaning that the entire work, the entire goods and services produced in Nigeria in a given year cannot buy Facebook. What it means then is that if we can focus on developing the human capital, the young brains of this country, if we could have 100 young people in this country, for example, who could create companies and ideas that are relevant to the world, even if they could achieve maybe 1/100 what a Google or a Facebook has achieved, we could actually take this GDP by a factor of 5, as in we can grow the GDP by a factor of 5. So I think the ERGP should focus some more on on growing human capital, on the people factor. But it's not a bad start that we have a plan.
Now, still looking at the human capital development that we talked about, is it possible to link it with the education sector, talking about the curriculum?
Absolutely.
What do you think the ERGP should be doing in that regards?
Well, what the ERGP is doing, from what I've been able to gather, is they have what they call like focus groups, like
focus
labs, and these focus labs is a way of, we have this huge problem with silo mentality in Nigeria, where every department, every agency, every ministry wants to work on their own. You can't see what we're doing. There's no collaboration. So I mean, all those kind of stuff is really good. I like that, breaking down the silo, unlocking new projects, unlocking sources of investment and so on. But the bigger advantage and the bigger prospect really actually lies in human capital, and that ties back to the economic, to the curriculum of our educational sector. Now, I personally look at the economy from a systems-based approach, meaning that if you're talking about...
You're a David Easton man.
Sorry, what did you say?
You're a David Easton man.
Oh, yeah, something like that, So basically, to look at it from a system-based approach, to say, if you want to fix the problem in the educational sector, it's not just about pumping money into the educational sector. I would rather we went into the educational sector and say, guys, you're going to have to be the ones to solve the electricity problem, right? So go to the Department of Electrical Engineering in every university and polytechnic, all right, and say, guys, what you have to do now, we want to incentivize you with sometimes a very small amount of money. Sometimes 10, 20 million will make a lot of difference. And say, guys, give us the best idea to power the next village. And what I've studied about the electricity sector so far is that what actually works are those small clusters, right? You can say, okay, go and power the next village. We don't care how you do it. If you can bring wind energy, mini or micro grid, if you can cannibalize a few things that you've seen lying on the ground, whatever works. But that village must be powered one bulb at a time. Then you scale up. All right, so therefore you can actually improve the educational sector to improve the electricity sector, to improve the infrastructure sector, to improve the agri sector. We say a lot of things, for example, and one of the focus of the ERGP is on agri, for example. Now, we say a lot of things about agri, but sometimes I tell myself, Africa knows very little about agriculture. Do you know that? That Africa knows very little about agriculture. People are talking now. I would be looking at a scenario where we can say, okay, the government investment in agriculture should be out to take science into agriculture. We've neglected those people in the villages for too long. We've left them to their devices for too long. Government should be investing in things like greenhouses for them. Yeah. People are talking about vertical farming now. You plant on the ground, you plant in media, you go to places like Netherlands, a small country, which is less than Niger State in size. It's about 42,000 square kilometers, the whole of Netherlands. And most of that is actually covered in water because that country is below sea level. But Netherlands is the second highest exporter of food in the world after the United States of America. They export $120 billion worth of food in the world. Nigeria's budget this year is $25 billion. So a lot can be done, and I like that question, great question. We should actually be taking the focus on human capital, talking about the educational sector, should actually be, saddling that educational sector with solving a lot of the problems that we have. So
the government should be more deliberate.
Absolutely, more deliberate.
Now, the reason I use the word more deliberate is because there are existing institutions, research institutions.
There are, yes.
In fact, over 100 research institutions across the country. We even have the biotechnology agency and all of that. So that's like taking science into agriculture. But is government actually being more, deliberate?
Like you said, the word deliberate is actually, for want of a better word, a deliberate word. Mm-hmm. It means that, you have to like focus on something and not give up until you get it done. All right. So yes, there are a lot of institutions, a lot of research institutes around the country. Some of them have become a bit moribund. Some of them have forgotten the reason why they're there. Actually, I happen to have sat on the committee at some point where we looked at the Oronsaye report and so on, and we found that they are very great institutions, but most of them are just there now for the purpose of electing directors, electing chairmen, and then when the chairman director comes, is like, okay, where's my official car? And some of them actually abused the scenario. They were holding, instead of 4 meetings every year, they were holding 8, 10, 12 meetings every year.
Each meeting comes with allowances.
Just collect the allowances. So you need that deliberateness. And again, it's about, we have a problem with those institutions, that's one. But we have an even bigger problem with our universities and polytechnic, to the extent that they have now become, like Nigerians just believe, okay, let's go there, let's get our certificates. And even the professors that are teaching there don't believe they're so much into the theory. And we need to begin to do something deliberate to actually torpedo them out of that system where it's all about theory, it's all about stuff, to let them understand that, like these companies that I mentioned earlier, which are the biggest companies, many of them were formed while people were in university, like the Facebook thing in Harvard, like the Google boys in Stanford. They were mere students. And so if you can look at that, and at that level, there's a lot more energy. We're not talking about old men that are trying to be chairmen and of board or board chairmen and all of those stuff. No, we're talking about young people in their teens, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, who are ready for a little bit of incentivization. We're looking at a scenario where people will go to school at the university and earn some little money, all right? So you can actually be able to sponsor yourself through university because you're doing something to add to the country. You know what I mean? So that was something good for the government to focus on.
All right, Tokpa, I want you to take a look at some of the figures released by the NBS and analyze for us whether the country is on track, even as far as the ERGP is concerned. Non-oil sector of the economy is said to have grown by 2.05% in real terms, representing 1.60% point increase in the same quarter last year and 1.29% points over the first quarter of 2018. Coming out from a recession. Are we on track?
We're just barely out of the recession. The final combination of the MBS report is that the GDP grew by 1.5% overall, which is a dip from 1.95% in the quarter before, which is, we're just kind of struggling out of this, like you're clambering out of that recession. You're not quite flying yet. The U.S. government, the U.S. economy grew by, you can't believe it, 4.1% the last quarter. And there's this thing, when an economy is developing or underdeveloped, it's actually a great opportunity for growth. In my own perspective, I believe that this economy should be growing in double digits, right? Double-digit growth. What we should be talking about
is that achievable?
It is, absolutely. China did it for a sustained period of time. For almost
what were they able to do to achieve that?
You see, when you're going to achieve double-digit growth, is going to be all-encompassing. It's going to be some sort of revolution being powered, through your system, because everybody has to show up for duty. It's going to be about emphasizing productivity in that economy. It's going to be about a lot of responsibility on the part of government to ensure that every 1 naira actually gets delivered and does the duty it should do. As a matter of fact, I'm actually developing an article now where I'm studying atomic energy, atomic power, to see what this definition of atomic energy by Albert Einstein, E is equal to mc squared, right? And the fact that every matter, every matter is made up of atoms, and every atom is made up of energy, and that if you can get into that energy in each atom, right, you can actually have a massive explosion. And so I'm thinking, okay, if we can break it down on an economic level and look at how we can actually look at each 1 naira as an atom, and we can say, okay, every 1 naira spent in Nigeria, every 1 naira spent in government, how can it power through the system and cause a kind of explosion? That's how you can get a double-digit growth. Right now, what they call the value for money, VFM, is very, very low at about 30%, meaning that every 1 naira spent in government, only 30 kobo manages to make it into the system. A lot of what we do, even in terms of productivity, is still foreign based. It's still like, externalized. We have this externalized view. All the cars used in government are like purchased from abroad. You have to find a way around this, in spite of the WTO and all of these other conventions that we have entered. But I believe that what we should be achieving right now is this. Interest rates is doing an average of about 20% still. And inflation, okay, fine, has come down about 11%, which is not too bad, all right? The focus should not be on taking inflation down to 3% for now. Because a 3% inflation, 4% inflation, that's what you see in the US and the UK, in most of Europe. We are not those economies. All right, according to some guys in Harvard, Land Pritchett and co., they talked about isomorphic mimicry in terms of that African countries like us are always quickly trying to compare themselves to the US and Europe and all. No, we're not at that level yet. There's nothing wrong if we have a 10% inflation, but our economy, GDP, should be growing at 15%, right, year on year for the next foreseeable period, so that's the point at which we're going to be ensuring that even down to the villages, we're getting everybody to be productive and adding value to everything that is.
How do we get everybody to be
productive? And of course, so inflation at
line.
about 10, 11%, and interest rates you could manage around 15 to 20%. But if you are not if you're growing at 1.5% and your inflation is at 11%, and your population growth rate is at 3%, and your interest rate in the banks is 25%, that is the meaning of economic malaise. You're like so negative because you can't be growing at 1.5%.
I ask the question, how do we get everybody to be productive? Because that seems to be the biggest challenge. Because when you talked about China, I reflected back on China and knew how productive the Chinese economy has been.
Absolutely. They are mad productive.
Flooding foreign markets with their products. Yeah. The Western countries may argue substandard products, but whatever it is, they are selling and they are getting foreign exchange.
They can't even say that anymore.
How do we get that to happen in Nigeria with a federal government, for instance, that is looking at incentivizing the poorest of the poor with what they call social investment programs? The stipends are looking at giving people to take people off the poverty line. Is that the primary focus?
That was a big sigh.
Should that be a primary focus?
That's a big sigh, because I would have thought that, for example, I had a better idea.
Yes.
In 2014, 2015, I was working on something and I actually recommended to government that we should have something like declaring a big project like they've done in the past, but this time you say Nigeria will be the cleanest, safest and most organized country in the world. Okay. However, what that does for you is that it allows you to put all your youthful energy behind this project. So imagine that we had a crazy idea to say, okay, Nigeria would be the cleanest country in the world, and we got our youth to be like obsessed with the environment, and no youth will see anything on the ground, they're picking it, guys are beautifying the streets, those who can draw very great pictures for us. I mean, if you went to Abeokuta, they tried to do something like that. On every of the bridge, you're painting it right. Even it took one white woman, when Lagos State was doing their 50th anniversary, one white lady was painting under Falomo Bridge and all of that. And those paintings are still there. That's how you do it. So you're putting your youthful energy and their passion behind such a project. All right. Now, what you're doing is actually you're rewiring their thinking, and you're also giving them ownership of their country. That was what China did. In order for China to get here, they have to go through what they call a cultural revolution, right? A cultural revolution under Mao Zedong to say, guys, this is China. You have to have the pride and the dignity in being a Chinese person. So if you can achieve that, you're going to actually be unlocking a lot of productivity in people. Right now, as I'm talking to you, there are millions of Nigerian youth in every ghetto around the country, even in Abuja here, who, when they wake up in the morning, it's all about taking tramadol and drugs, and nobody's talking to them. So you got to find them where they are. You have to incentivize them, give them some little amount of money. So, hey, we're back to the cleanest country, the safest, meaning that you have to also put some of them in light security work. The only way you can conquer all of this terrorism and all that is to put the youth as the security people. You know, they don't have to wear uniforms, you know, but you know that, look, you're selling it to them that this is our country. Right now, what we have seen, unfortunately, is that more and more youth are getting disconnected. And before you know it, people start to talk about, look, do we have to be in one country? Can we not break up and go? And all? And again, in organizing the country, there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of money in organizing the country. In fact, the moment you organize a country and people know that they have to stick to the rule of law and you can't break a rule without a sanction being attached to it, all these monies that government is looking for will appear. All the taxes will come, all the fees, fines, rates, levies, and all of that. The difference between our country and most other countries in the world is that they are just a little bit more organized. And unfortunately, even some of those Eastern African countries, watch them. They're getting quite more. Rwanda, even Kenya,
Tanzania,
Uganda, even Tanzania, even Malawi, even Zambia. I've been to some of those places before. You know, I remember in Uganda, in Kampala, you will never see anybody like urinating or defecating by the streets. And in Abuja, you come here, a built-up city, you see some of those things. Now, what did they do in Uganda? What they did in Kampala is to say every filling station should have a public bathroom in the back, and you charge a token for people who want to use it. So you know that if you are pressed, all you have to do is get to the next filling station and you can actually do
it. You actually preempted
it's just a clever way
you preempted my question with the analogy you gave about kicking up a campaign to make Nigeria the cleanest, safest and most organized country in the world. Looking at water supply and sewage, it was one of those areas that created some level of growth, which is 17.98%.
Yeah.
Now, based on the analogy you have given, it means that Nigeria can actually expand its GDP and economic scope by merely, focusing on water and sewage.
Absolutely, you can. You see, you'll be shocked just how much you can achieve in this area. Water and sewage and general environmental sanitation. That is a growth sector that we haven't even talked about. Right. Look, and I always, I'm going to actually have to set up an environmental management company at this rate, because it's a passion of mine. But I look at a place like Abuja and I say, look, we have these very nice enclosed estates everywhere. You know, by now, all of those estates that are posh estates should be able to, you give them this kind of, plastics where they separate different kind of waste and people can easily pick it up. That's how it's done in London and in other places. Why can't you do it in Maitama? You have a plastic waste here, glass here, paper there, and all that, and compost there, and in a way it organizes society. You can actually incentivize people. For a little, if you're able to do this, we give you a credit of 100 naira or 500 naira or something in a month, even 1,000 a month. It's a lot of money. People will be like, and it's a good kind of incentive. And again, that's also about organizing society. What we're seeing right here now is everybody does things the way they want. Just throw it everywhere, and people waste water, for example. Sometimes even in the estate I live, I see scenarios where guys wake up in the morning, they are washing cars. I mean, some of them are like maybe gatesmen or whatever, washing cars, and they're using so much water. It kills me.
Will you be curious?
Where you live, I tell some of them, I say, where you live, maybe where you come from, in the suburbs of Abuja, you don't even have water to drink. Why would you use like how many hundreds of gallons of water just to wash a car? So it's some of this we need to pay attention to. But one thing I want to quickly say, Salamatu, is that with 17.9% growth in water, 11% growth in telecoms, 7% in electricity, 21% growth in road, rail, and water. But the growth was still dragged down by a fall of 3.9% in oil, which is what dragged it down. So meaning that the economy is still so dependent on this resource called crude oil. And that's what we need to actually begin to take ourselves out of.
Okay. Now, looking at the states, I mean, the federal government has an economic plan, but there seems to be so much focus on the federal government. Nobody is really talking about the plans, advanced by the state governments. How do you think this can actually affect the GDP?
I don't know how we got here, you know what I mean? I don't know how we got to this point as a people. We have a scenario now where there's a total opacity in terms of how the states function. Lagos State sometimes manages to publish one or two things. But the other time I was actually researching South Africa, and you'll be shocked. Anybody can try it now. Just go to Google. Google South Africa's 2018 budget. 2018 budget in 2018. Google Johannesburg 2018 budget. Google Cape Town 2018 budget, and you will see the document in PDF. The entire document, and all of these budgets have kicked in since February this year. They've been working on it. Yeah, and they throw all, so there's this problem. And the other day I was somewhere and someone said, now that the federal government cannot even compel the states to be financially accountable. I said, well, it may be so on paper, and of course the lawyers will come and argue all sorts. But I believe that if the federal government wanted to, they will. I also believe that to a large extent, the federal government itself could still do a lot more in terms of transparency.
Yes.
Okay.
Like this ERGP thing now, they have actually put out quite a bit of information. They've made it quite, and it can only help the government when you're transparent, so that people don't go around bickering and guest walking and all of that stuff. So that's the way I look at it. So the states, and there's something called the CAFR in the US, and the CAFR is Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. It is a report that every agency of government must publish on an annual basis, and I think that's one of the kind of things that we can adopt.
All right, you want to occupy the #1 seat of this country? You're an aspirant.
Well, I try sometimes,
I'm just wondering how you intend to deal with very complex issues like land reform and power. I'm just wondering.
Okay, let me start with power. So on power, like again,
very quickly.
Very quickly, I said it again. Listen, let me tell you, I won't deceive you. No matter how long we continue to import power plants, it will never solve our problem in Nigeria. Nigeria suffers, according to Fashola, we lose 2,000 megawatts every day in what they call stranded energy. According to Mekanti Baru, who's the MD of NNPC, GMD, we lose almost the same amount in terms of stranded gas every day. That is a lot of investment. And so the only solution to our power problem will be, when we take it back to the youth of this country in those universities to start to think about clusters. I understand that is how Germany started. That when they people have the capability after the Second World War. People would begin to create power to power their streets, first of all from their house and then to their street. It's from the ground up, developed from the ground up. Unlike what we did to go and establish a huge national grid. And I've actually studied enough to realize that most countries are actually moving away from the idea of national grid, including the United States. California right now will not give you a new approval on a new building except you show solar power panels on top of it, except you show that you are going to do some alternative energy. And that's what we can do here.
Right.
In terms of land reform, of course, yes, we need to ensure that people are able to own what they own and be able to collateralize it when they want to borrow money and all of that. That can be done.
Dr. Probably next we'll have you talk about your views on restructuring.
That's my
major issue as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Economist, author, also presidential aspirant, Tokwe Fashola. Pleasure having you here with us.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you for being a part of the show. We'll be right back tomorrow with another edition. I am Salamatu Ibrahim.
I am Mutaba Umaran. Thank you so much for being there with us. Join us again on Thursday.